Hey, you just got some new studio monitors. Let's learn how to set them up the right way. If you're new here, my name is James, and I help church sound techs to make every worship mix an enjoyable one, whether that's a live mix in the room or a broadcast over the stream. Go ahead and hit subscribe, ding the little bell, and turn your notifications on to all. You don't want to miss another video that I post. With studio monitors, it takes a little bit of setup to get them dialed in just right so that your mix translates everywhere. Now, you're probably thrilled that they've got a really flat frequency response and sound really good. But it can be a little bit tricky to get them set up so that what you hear out of your monitors in the studio is what you're hearing in the rest of the world. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set them up properly and some of the acoustic treatment that you might need to look into if you're just getting started. Now, in an ideal environment, your studio monitors would form an equilateral triangle, so that the distance from just behind your head to each monitor is the same distance as the monitors to each other. This also means that they should be angled in at 60 degrees. So if we have our speakers, and we have an imaginary line here that creates a triangle, all three of these lines are going to be the same, and our head, with our little ears sticking out on the side, is going to be right here. So this distance equals this distance equals this distance. This angle here should match this angle here, and that's 60 degrees. This is going to make sure that your ears are the most on axis to your speaker's frequency response. When this is done right, you'll have a good idea of how the middle balances with the sides. This is especially important when we're trying to create a vocal pocket. If we have our speakers too far apart, it's like stretching out a rubber band. That middle is going to get thin. But if they're too close together, then that middle will be built up too much. One thing that you'll learn with studio monitors is that whatever it sounds like in your room, it's going to sound the opposite everywhere else. So if your speakers are too close together and you're getting more middle out of your mix, you're going to tuck that vocal and that kick and snare a little bit too far back in the mix, and it's going to sound distant when you listen someplace else. On the flip side, if your speakers are too far apart, they won't couple enough, and so by overcoming that and pushing your vocal out in front, it's going to end up too far out in front everywhere else. I have some specific reference tracks that I use to check this. Stay to the end and I'll tell you about them. Something that's a little more obvious is making sure that your speakers are at the same height as your ears. Basically, you want the tweeters to be right at about eye or ear level. This is helpful because high frequencies are really directional and you don't want to be off axis at all to your speakers. If you can't get them that high, you can angle them up, but just realize that you're going to be further off axis if you move back at all in your seat. A third thing that's really helpful for studio monitors is making sure that they're decoupled from the monitor stand. The low frequencies that the speakers are producing can vibrate the stand itself, and you can lose energy through that onto the floor. Or even worse, it can rattle, and then it'll drive you nuts when a certain bass note hits. Now, if you're in a pretty small space, you're also going to have to think about acoustic treatment, and this makes a big difference both for your frequency response and your ability to pan things. Usually a smaller space isn't so live that you have trouble dialing in your effects, but it still can be helpful for that too. The first goal you have with setting up your speakers is creating a reflection-free zone, or wherever the first place that those speakers are bouncing off a wall, you want to absorb that with acoustic treatment so that you don't create comb filtering. Comb filtering happens when two identical sounds arrive at our ear at almost the same time, but not quite. If you do an A/B test with and without acoustic treatment, you'll start to hear what I mean. So if these are your studio monitors and this is your head, you're going to want to put acoustic treatment wherever the sound from the studio monitors would bounce off the wall and reach your ear. This is called the first reflection. So that ends up being on the side walls, on the front wall, on the back wall, and on the ceiling. So you'd put one right above, in between you and your monitors. Now, hanging things from the ceiling is always tricky, so make sure that you do it safely. The next thing you'll want to do with acoustic treatment is some bass traps, or absorbing low frequencies. While you can overdo it with absorbers that absorb high and high middle frequencies, it's almost impossible to absorb too much bass in a small room. The reflections of the low frequencies will cancel some frequencies out entirely. So if you use some measurement software to test out your room, don't be surprised if you see a big dip in the frequency response down in the low frequencies. If this is making sense so far, type "it's all about the low end" in the comments below. Now there are three basic advantages that you have in studio monitors rather than using headphones. The first, that is in headphones, you're less likely to pan things hard left and right and clutter up the middle just a little bit more by panning things in toward the center, because it sounds a little bit too wide when something is only in this ear and not in this ear. Out in the real world, we'll actually hear the reflections coming from the left speaker in our right ear. So we can tolerate a lot more panning when we're using studio monitors, and that opens up more of the middle. The second thing that's hard to do when mixing in headphones is getting the vocal balance right with the band. Because everything seems so clear, it can be easy to tuck the vocal too far back, or if we didn't pan everything hard left and right enough, then we can actually put the vocal too far out in front because our middle got cluttered up by our other instruments. The third thing that's tricky in headphones is getting the effects and the reverb dialed in just right. In headphones, we tend to want a really nice smooth reverb, but that sounds kind of washed out when we listen through speakers, so watch out for that too. Now, one advantage of headphones is that they can isolate you from the acoustic space, so you don't get any of those weird resonances from the low frequencies rattling around in your room. This can be helpful for getting your bass dialed in without any of the coloration that comes from your room. But you also have to look out that the headphones aren't coloring the sound themselves. Try to get the best headphones that you can that have the flattest frequency response. Some of them are hyped up so that they sound better when you're listening to recorded music, but they're not really all that helpful for mixing music. One of my favorite pairs of headphones are the Audio-Technica M50s. They're not perfectly flat, but for around $150, it's hard to go wrong with them. Now here's another bonus for you if you're setting up your studio monitors in a space where you get to move the furniture. The distance that your studio monitors are from the walls makes a big difference in how the monitors sound themselves. There's a bunch of acoustic stuff that I don't really fully understand about the relationship of the speaker and its distance to the wall. But if you can, experiment with different distances from the front wall. The technically correct way to place it is so that your mix position is 35% of the way from the front of the room to the back of the room. Now that's not always perfect by any means, but it does give you a starting place. Now I told you that I'd share my tracks that I use for reference to get my monitors spaced apart just the right way. So I've got three different tracks that I'm using. One's tucked way back in the pocket, one's way out in front, and one's just right. Kind of like Goldilocks. The first track where the vocal is way back in the pocket is Message in a Bottle by Sting and the Police. That vocal is really far back. So if I'm listening to speakers and that vocal doesn't sound so far back, I know they might be too close together. The second track is Norah Jones' Come Away With Me. On that track, the vocal is way out in front, and it's so right. If every vocal sounded that good, every record should be mixed that way. If I'm listening to that track and the vocal doesn't seem like it's really far out in front, I know that my speakers are probably spaced too far apart. Now the one that I like that's just right is One Headlight by the Wallflowers. Everything about that track just feels really good. So hey, if you liked this video, go ahead and hit thumbs up, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe and ding the little bell to get notified every time I post a new video. I'm here to help you make every worship mix sound enjoyable, whether it's on the web stream or live there in the room.